What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as hamhocks42 on the internet, and today we are going to be discussing Lord of the Rings previews. Now, preview season has begun in earnest, and we have seen a ton of new cards that will be included in the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set, and it is exciting. And honestly, we got so many cards today that I was really struggling on where to begin, because I want to talk about freaking all of them, but normally on the show, Overthinking MTG, I look at an individual card and talk about it for about 10 minutes, and I knew that was not going to cut it here. So rather than going through and just looking at like all the cards of X color or all the cards of X type, I decided to break this up thematically, because this is Lord of the Rings that we're dealing with, and well, this story is one that means a lot to a lot of people, and it does to me as well. So today, we are going to start by just looking at the cards representing the Fellowship themselves, the 9 characters that set out from Rivendell to support Frodo on his quest. Now, there are multiple cards depicting these characters, especially Frodo and Sam, and then when you also look at the main set and the Commander products. For the purposes of this episode, for this discussion, I'm going to be looking at the highest rarity versions of each of these creatures in the main set. And in the case of Frodo, there are 2 of them. There's Frodo Determined Hero, and then also Frodo Sauron's Bane. Sauron's Bane was previewed at an earlier event, so that's one that perhaps people had some thoughts on. So instead, I decided to just go with the one that was previewed today. And there's also a thematic thread with all the hobbits that I want to call out, and Frodo Determined Hero matches it, which I think is really cool. So let's go ahead and get started right there. I'm going to start with all the hobbits, and then we're going to move on, and we're going to end with the humans. So we're going to start with Frodo Determined Hero. This is a 2/2 halfling warrior for 1 and a white. Whenever Frodo Determined Hero, he's legendary. Whenever Frodo Determined Hero enters the battlefield or attacks, you may attach target equipment you control with mana value 2 or 3 to Frodo. As long as it's your turn, prevent all damage that will be dealt to Frodo. So I kind of love this guy because he's very aggro. This version of Frodo is designed to like pick up a weapon, pictured with Sting, and it's showing Sting glowing in his hands, which means orcs are present, danger is here, and so he's getting into a fight. Like, he's not just posturing. On the other side of this, on the other side of the camera, I have no doubt there is an enemy, and he is locked and loaded, ready to tangle with them. I think this is fun. I like this. I like this character, this version of Frodo, who doesn't take no guff and is gonna stand up and go into a fight. I kind of love it. Also, Frodo picking up weapons. I mean, that's something that we do see the character do, I suppose. It's not necessarily core to his identity by any means, although I suppose the thing that's core to Frodo's identity is like getting stabbed, so that's not really an awesome feature to preview on the card. So okay, him picking up equipment, that's fine too. I'm not mad at it. So think about it. Like, there's the troll in the films. It was an orc in the books. In Moria, you've got the Witch King, and you've got Shelob. Frodo gets stabbed. It's what he does anyway. So this one, caring about equipment, is neat. The fact that it only grabs equipment with mana value 2 or 3 is very relevant, and I have no doubt it is just so that he can't pick up a Colossus Hammer. If Colossus Hammer and Shadow Spear were available to Frodo Determined Hero, this card would all of a sudden become playable in even older formats in Hammer Time decks, and that could be potentially problematic. I personally think it's fine. Actually, it's potentially problematic because he's not going to be dying in combat. So that damage prevention is very real. It's notable that Frodo is not indestructible on your turn, the way that Thrun and some other cards are. It says, as long as it's your turn, you prevent all damage that would be dealt to Frodo. So if there's an effect like Stomp on the Bone Crusher Giant that prevents combat or prevents damage prevention, then all of a sudden that just doesn't work. And on top of that, well, it's kind of fun too, because this kind of gets around First Strike in some neat ways. Damage just isn't dealt to Frodo. I think that's neat. So he's just impervious, and I guess he's got the mithril armor, so that kind of makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. It's a cool card, and the noteworthy detail that I wanted to point out with the hobbits specifically, you will note all 4 hobbits that appear within the Fellowship themselves. They're all 2/2s for 2. Which I think is kind of appropriate because they're small creatures, but they are mighty for their stature. So them being 2/2s and like efficiently costed. I kind of like that. I think it fits. Anyway, the next one that we're going to talk about is Samwise Gamgee. My personal favorite character in the books, honestly. Like, kind of, he's just the best. I don't know what to say. And on top of that, Sean Astin absolutely crushed it in the movies. Okay, I'm not going to be talking about the movie a ton because that's clearly not what they are, you know, referencing here. This is clearly based on the text. But Samwise Gamgee, what do we got? Green and a white, which I'm kind of surprised that like more of the hobbits aren't green and white, to be honest. I think that just, it fits them in general. But anyway, 2/2 for 2. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. You can then sacrifice 3 food tokens to return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. Sam is support. He is a protector, he is a provider, and he is a gardener. So of course, he has the ability to create food, and he will provide it to people when they arrive. I kind of love that. It's just like, this dude's got your back, he brought snacks, and he is happy to see you. I think that's great. And then on top of that, when he has provisions available, he can return, you know, historic cards from the graveyard, so he can recount sagas, he can bring legendaries back, which, I mean, he's not like reanimating them, he's returning them to your hand, but he's converting a resource in his food into something that is going to be beneficial and downright necessary on the journey forward. So I don't know, I think Sam bringing his, you know, bringing his pots and pans was part of the story, and you see that here. Also, I just love the fact that he's pictured with, I believe at least one of these little hobbits is probably his child, because at the very end of Return of the King, spoiler warning, he and Rosie do get together and they have children. And the very last line, which they, again, the movies got correct, he comes home and picks up his child and says, "Well, I'm back." And that's the very last line of the book. And I got chills every single time I read that. And I'm sure I still would. There's something that is the button on the whole adventure. It was just so good. And so Sam is, you know, he's a family man once he settles back home. And so the idea that like his kids, and I also want to believe that like 1 or 2 of these little hobbit kids are like maybe like his kids' friends, and they're just like hanging out, listening to him read a story. I love that. The idea that like the little like neighborhood kids are hanging out with, you know, somebody they see as like Uncle Sam. I don't know. I love this. I love this guy. He's freaking amazing. This card embodies him perfectly. He's also a halfling peasant, which is kind of a fun creature type. Choosing to keep the halfling tag so that it's consistent with like the D&D sets. I like that. Just top notch all around. Absolutely love it. Next up, we're going to be talking about Pippin, Guard of the Citadel. So Merry and Pippin are really cool characters throughout the story. They're kind of tag-alongs at first, like they have characters, but you know, they have kind of their little isms and their own little quirks, but it's not really until later on in the stories when they really come into their own and develop and grow. And with Pippin, he actually becomes, you know, like a guard in, you know, Minas Tirith. Kind of a big deal, like a knight of friggin' Gondor. No big deal. So him typed as a halfling soldier makes perfect sense. He's a 2/2 for white blue. So the idea of Pippin being Azorius is kind of cool. I like that. Again, we have the white aligned, but he has blue in the mix. Actually, does Pippin make sense? Hey, I'm cool with that. Anyway, he has Vigilance and Ward 1. And then tap another target creature you control gains protection from the card type of your choice until end of turn. He's a guard. He is a protector. He protects those around him, which is a theme that you see in a couple of other cards and a couple of other characters that are in this set. And we are definitely going to be talking about at least one more today. Guardians and protectors are very, very important. I mean, when you think about the Lord of the Rings, the story is an escort mission. Frodo is carrying the fate of their entire world in his hands, and he needs to reach his destination. Everyone that is there to support him is there to protect him and get him where he needs to go. So yeah, there are a lot of people whose thing is protecting others and sacrificing themselves if necessary to protect those they love and care about. And the other theme within Lord of the Rings is all about there being something worth fighting for, and this beautiful heart of virtue that exists within the world that is worth protecting, which is often represented by the Shire and the hobbits. And the fact that these hobbits have to take up arms and fight to protect it is kind of a big frickin' deal. And we see that here. The idea that Pippin has vigilance and ward. He has grown strong and tough, and he is willing to use that to protect those around him. Love it. From a mechanical perspective, Pippin is kind of similar to a Mother of Runes style effect, although Mother of Runes is it is different in that it gives protection based on colors, not card types. So be aware of that. So if your opponent is trying to hit, simple example, if your opponent is trying to hit one of your creatures with, say, a pacifism style effect, maybe a planar disruption or something like that, or maybe like a leyline binding, or, an enchantment that is trying to remove one of your, one of your creatures, Pippin can be tapped to give that creature protection from enchantments, and it will prevent the removal from occurring. The reason I mention enchantments, though, if that creature has an aura that is perhaps beneficial, an audacity or a rancor or something of that nature, like attached to them, the moment they gain protection from enchantments, that aura will fall off, because when you have protection, you can't have cards of the type or that match the criteria of the protection attached to that creature. Same would happen with artifacts and equipment. They would fall off. In the case of equipment, they could pick it back up theoretically, but in the case of auras, they're gone, they go to the graveyard. So be aware of that. So that is an interaction that you may see here. The other thing that Pippin can do, if you do not, or actually one thing you can do, a great use for this, if you're attacking with multiple things, you can attack with Pippin because he has vigilance. Before blockers are declared, you can tap Pippin. He's still attacking as a 2/2 and can give another creature protection from creatures. Now, Pippin doesn't necessarily have to be attacking, but the vigilance gives you the option. If that other creature then has protection from creatures, it's unblockable. It's just going to get right through and just punch directly at your opponent's face. So Pippin, and we've seen, I didn't mention it, or, it was the one I chose not to discuss, but Frodo Sauron's Bane has a benefit, and there are a couple of other cards in the set that have benefits when they strike the opponent. Like when you actually deal combat damage to your opponent, you get a benefit. Well, Pippin can clear the way for those creatures. That's really cool by giving them protection from creatures. I love it. I think this card is actually really, really cool. So, good going, Pippin. Let's go. All right, next up, we are going to be talking about Merry, Esquire of Rohan. He's another 2/2 for 2. This one, though, is white and red. So all the hobbits that we're seeing are white aligned, but this one we have red. So it kind of makes sense. Merry is definitely, like, the Rohirrim are very, like, he rides into battle with Rohan. They're the horse masters. They're very, like, quick, agile, very difficult to deal with. They're a very assertive fighting force. So them being red aligned, totally cool with it. Let's go. So Merry has haste, is a 2/2, yeah, and it has first strike as long as it's equipped. Whenever you attack with Merry and another legendary creature, draw a card. So we've seen a theme with the 4 hobbits that are included in the Fellowship. They all have this kind of subtext of supporting others. So in the case of Merry, you get to draw cards. You, the player, are benefiting because Merry is riding into battle with another legendary creature. Well, famously on the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Merry rode in alongside Éowyn to do battle with the Witch King. So it kind of makes sense that is represented mechanically here by Merry getting benefits for riding in with somebody else. Also, his knife, the barrow blade that he wielded, was notable in taking down the Witch King. So that was pretty cool. Like, he's Merry's a pretty cool dude. He's a fearsome fighter, and he grows into a very powerful warrior in his own right. And I think they've captured that here while still being a small creature. So it's kind of challenging with these hobbits because they're all 2/2s for 2, and they need to have some kind of relevant ability, and they need to be a force on the battlefield. So how do you do that? Well, First Strike is a highly underrated ability. If you give Merry something like a Bone Splitter, give him +2/+0, having a 4/2 First Striker with haste, I mean, that's an investment. That's a total mana investment of 4 over multiple turns, because Bone Splitter costs 1 and then 1 to equip. So that's not that tough to pull off, really. So something like that could make this little guy a very real player in combat, either on defense as blocking low toughness, high power creatures with first strike is really nice. Or you could also, I mean, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Basilisk Collar, get first strike, death touch on this guy. Let's go to town. But anyway, but you also get the benefit upon attacking. It's just, this is Boros equipment done right, in my opinion. I think it also doesn't take away from the flavor of Lord of the Rings. And seriously, this set is just oozing with flavor. It is just, I want it all in my face, because the flavor of this set is second to none, and it has to be, because the entire reason this set exists is to tap into nerd flavor, and I think they're doing just that. So speaking of nerd flavor, the next one that we want to talk about, we're done with the hobbits for now, and we're going to be talking about Gimli, Mournful Avenger. So we're going into the next scale, we're going into the next largest creature, and so with Gimli, we have a 3/2 for 1 red green. Gimli, Mournful Avenger has indestructible as long as 2 or more creatures died under your control this turn. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Gimli. When this ability resolves for the 3rd time this turn, Gimli fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. This card slaps. I love it. I think this card is absolutely fantastic. The Gimli is a very well-rounded character. Actually, all of them are. That's one of the things that makes this story so compelling. But one of the things about Gimli is that he has a strong connection to his heritage, his people. He believes in what the dwarves stand for, and he mourns those he's lost. That is something that is represented multiple times, especially when they are traveling through Moria, because Moria was once this beautiful kingdom of the dwarves, and his people it was this massive testament to their might, and it was destroyed. And so for, especially when they're going through Moria, he is just in, not that he's distraught over it, but actually I think one of the things they captured here nicely, he channels those feelings into, he channels his anger into his opponent's face with his axe. Like, he is going to take down those who have wronged his people. That is something he absolutely does. And that is 100% what this does. And on top of that, he goes, like, when he gets, when he really, like, ramps up, he gets nasty. So every single time a creature you control dies, you put a counter on him. Every single time. The second time that happens, he gains indestructibility. So by the time, first turn that this is going off, starts as a 3/2. 2 other of your things die. All of a sudden, you're looking at a 5/4. One more goes, you now have a 6/5 indestructible creature that is now fighting whatever you want. Now, the setup on that is a little tricky because you need to be having multiple creatures you control die. And that is a weird situation because, again, speaking from a kind of a flavor perspective, unless there's some support in other Lord of the Rings cards that I haven't necessarily seen yet, that's a very black kind of ability. Like, this is the kind of effect that you would want in a sacrifice style deck, which when you're the one sacrificing your own things for power, the idea of somebody being sad about that and taking that out on somebody else who's not the person doing it, that's kind of awkward. Like, there's a little bit of a dissonance there. The first thing that I'm going to do with this guy is put him in some kind of Jund sacrifice deck. I'll tell you that right now. That's 100% what I'm doing with him. And it's going to be awesome. He's going to supercharge those decks like you have never seen. Now, I believe it was a very intentional choice to not give him access to black in his own color identity so he could not helm that kind of a deck. Because, oh my goodness, like, as a commander, but also flavorfully, it wouldn't make any sense to make Gimli black aligned. I wouldn't buy that at all, even for a second. But red, 100%. Gimli, I mean, honestly, part of that is just we associate dwarves with red, but he's also like a berserker fighter, so okay, sure. Like, it totally checks out. It fits. That is an easy selection. Green is interesting, especially because Gimli actually has some beef with the Ents at one point because he carries an axe. They don't like it. So the embodiment of nature looks at Gimli and is like, yo, bro, I do not like your vibe. I'm not picking up what you're laying down. So the fact that he's green aligned, I think is kind of interesting. But the dwarves in their own way are very close to nature and the earth, just on a deeper level, like a literally deeper level than a lot of the things we typically associate with the color green. Stone and, stone, gems, the crafting of such. That being green aligned, I'm actually not mad at. Like, that kind of makes sense. So anyway, I think this card is super cool. It's the kind of thing I definitely want to build around. And yes, there are going to be, on my streams, Jund historic sack decks with Gimli in the mix. That's 100% going to happen, and it's going to be awesome. All right, next up, of course, we talked about Gimli first. You know where we're going next. We're going to be looking at Legolas, Master Archer. So Legolas is a 1/4 for 1 green. Of course, he's mono green. With reach, whenever you cast a spell that targets Legolas, Master Archer, put a +1/+1 counter on Legolas. Whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you don't control, Legolas deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. Now, note, the spell that is targeting the thing and Legolas shooting his arrow at something else, they're completely separate. So the way that this triggers is when I target something with a spell, so I target one of your creatures with a kill spell, Legolas triggers, and I now have the option of taking whatever Legolas's power is and shooting it at something else. It is not limited to target the same creature that I was targeting. So that's important to note. We do have multiple targeting triggers going on at once, but they operate independently, which kind of makes sense because if I'm in a situation where I'm the player, as like an ally of Legolas in this kind of idea, like I'm taking a shot in one direction, and he's knocking somebody else out, that's kind of cool. I like it. And it's dealing damage equal to its power to up to 1 target creature. So you can only hit creatures, you can't hit planeswalkers, you can't hit battles. A little bit of a bummer. I wish you could hit any target, but then he would probably be a little too strong. But yeah, that ability of whenever you're casting spells that are targeting other things, you get to just take free shots and stuff is neat. I like that. So this actually would fit really nicely into some kind of like girl deck with burn spells. You can do some really fun things with that. You could also add pump spells to the mix because that boosts Legolas's power. So that's very real. If you hit Legolas with the giant growth, you get the +3/+3, buffing up to 4/5, but then you will also get the +1/+1 counter. That's going to stick around after the fact. So you have a 6/7 for that turn. Sorry, 6. I don't do math good. 6/9. Nice. So you will have a 6/9 on the battlefield to do that action. You can deal 6 if you then target something, you deal 6 damage to something. You have a massive reach all of a sudden. Like, I think this card's actually really cool, and I like them mechanically. There isn't a go-to deck that this just automatically slots in, at least that as far as I see. Like, I'm not thinking of any commanders like that are jumping out at me. Anything with +1/+1 counters, you can probably make this work, but you have to have kind of, maybe not a critical mass, but you have to have a respectable number of targeted spells in order to take advantage of these triggers. So this is kind of a unique twist on the green counters matter thing. I kind of like it. Like, I think a Legolas like commander deck would be very possible to build, but maybe a little tricky. You would definitely want to go some kind of Voltron action, but with spells. And you would definitely want to have some spells that could target other creatures. That way you could get the removal mode on Legolas. And actually in Commander, you could do some fun things where when people are in combat, you can target your opponents. So if you're in a 4-player pod, say 2 other players are engaged in some form of combat, if you have Legolas down, you could target one of the creatures that is either attacking or blocking that belongs to one of your opponents, buff it with a buff spell, and that will trigger Legolas, and you can shoot down something else on that battlefield. So you have, like, mastery over combat in a cool way if Legolas is on the board, based on just instant speed spells in your hand. So I think this is really neat. I like this design quite a bit, actually. Yeah, Legolas, Master Archer. Let's go. All right, so you'll notice we haven't touched any of the humans yet. I promised we were going to end with the humans. And so next up, we are not looking at a human. We are going to be looking at another non-human, and that is Gandalf the White. You will notice the creature type on Gandalf is Avatar Wizard. That is absolutely correct. If you are not a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry for how much I've been nerd gushing this whole time, but it is what it is. Gandalf looks human. He actually is not. He is... I can never remember if he's one of the Maiar or I think Maiar. I think he's anyway, he's a demigod, basically. So Avatar actually makes a lot of sense. But he's an immortal being. And I'm not just saying that because he gets literally reborn in the story, but like that he always was. Like Gandalf the Grey has existed for thousands upon thousands of years. Like he's kind of been there. Like in the Silmarillion, as part of the creation story, the wizards show up. So like anyway, he's been around for a very long time. He is kind of a big freaking deal. And he's the fact that he's kind of on like the good side. The fact that he's on our side. Is like frankly OP, like, and you really see it when you read The Hobbit. Like they had to nerf, like like the party, like they had to get him out of there. Like there were huge sections where like Gandalf just wasn't here because he'd be able to solve all of these problems with no issue. So we just need some reason to have him not present, and they do a little bit of that in Lord of the Rings as well. But in any event, Gandalf the White. What does the card do? So Gandalf the White is a 4/5 flash for 3 white, of course. You may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. If a legendary permanent or an artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is super narrow and also super broad, and it's taking the two effects that are beloved and smashing them onto one thing in a kind of a unique, weird way. This is a Vedalken Orrery in that it gives you flash speed on your legendary and artifact spells, but it's only for your legendary and artifact spells, unlike Vedalken Orrery, which is absolutely everything. But it also gives you like a Panharmonicon style effect that as legendary permanents or artifacts are entering or leaving, in this case, leaving counts too, which is nice, when they cause triggers, those triggers happen multiple times. Now, note, the triggers don't have to belong to the legendary permanent. So if you have a Soul Warden down and you drop Gandalf the White at flash speed on your opponent's end step, boom, this 4/5 is now in the mix. Soul Warden triggers twice because this is a legendary creature that just entered the battlefield. That's a pretty simple example, but you can imagine that has the potential to get out of hand real fast. In the right kind of deck, this is just downright silly. You'll also note this is a mythic. That is not accidental because this card is cracked if built around successfully. There are plenty of decks and plenty of decks cannot take advantage of this. This is not a go-to auto slam in every deck. It just isn't. It is a 5-drop with flash. There are plenty of formats and plenty of styles of play where this just does not fit at all. You know, and you need legendary permanents and artifacts in order to make it work. Now, note, basically, actually, I'm pretty sure at this point, every single planeswalker that's ever been printed is legendary. You also have legendary creatures at an enormous rate. We see legendary creatures in every new set. Like some of the best playable cards in a lot of the sets these days are all legends, just because I believe that that's a byproduct of Commander becoming so popular. There's like, well, let's make this one legendary. But in any event, so there's a lot of legendary spells and artifacts running around. If your deck has a critical mass of those and you have access to white, Gandalf the White fits really well. I think this is going to be a money card for Commander. People are going to want their hands on this. It's real good. It's funny too, because when they spoiled the Gandalf the Grey, like the Is It Gandalf, like months ago now, he was like cool, but not great. And I kind of assumed that Gandalf the White was going to be like amazing to kind of compensate, and I think he is. Like, this looks really good. Additionally, so not only does it give you the ability to cast legendary and artifact spells at flash speed, because he himself has flash speed, if you're at a point where it's late in the game and you've got a ton of mana, just a ridiculous amount of mana, you can throw Gandalf and something else out of nowhere that normally wouldn't come into play, you know, at instant speed, and then you just have it. Like, I don't know, the potential here is really cool. And there are also like cards like Glass Casket and Portable Hole that are artifacts where if you can do that at instant speed, you can really throw your opponent off their tempo. You can negate triggers. Like, things can get weird. And I think that's great. Playing at instant speed is a huge power boost. huge. And so the fact that he gives you that in a narrow capacity, fantastic. All right, next up. Here we go. Here we have our first actual human that we're going to be talking about, and that is Boromir, Warden of the Tower. So Boromir, being a human in the party, he's the other human aside from Aragorn, who we'll get to next, played by Sean Bean, which just told everyone who hadn't read the books, by the way, this dude dies. Yeah. And honestly, he was actually one of the most interesting characters to me when I first read the books, because he's just kind of this, like, I don't know, he seems like just kind of this milquetoast good guy for so long, and you're just kind of like, sure, you're just like this good guy who's just sort of here just to be here, you know. You don't think much of it. He's just doing his thing, and then all of a sudden, like when he has kind of a heel turn near the end of the story where the ring does tempt him, and he turns and tries to take it from Frodo. And that is a really harrowing moment, because you have a second where you realize, like, oh, he was like this, he was this virtuous symbol of good throughout the entirety of this story, who seemed like he had everything going for him and was a strong, again, protector of this group, this party, who could be trusted. And it turns out the ring even got to him. What chance do we have? And that's ultimately what drives Frodo to the decision that he needs to split off and go by himself. Sam has some things to say about that, which I appreciate. But in any event, Boromir was a phenomenal character throughout the story. And then after that, after he has that moment of weakness, that moment of corruption, he then redeems himself by giving up his own life, trying to save Merry and Pippin from being abducted by orcs. So, and that scene, like when they find his body at the beginning of Two Towers, and it is like, you can tell, like, I think I'm trying to remember the exact number of orcs that he slew before being taken down, and they downplay it in the movies. They downplay it in the movies a lot to make it like believable, because it would have been ridiculous. You know, he took down a ton. Anyway, he's a really cool character, very conflicted. You could tell he's a good person who had a moment of weakness. You know, maybe he does not have the strongest will of the party, but he wants what is best for those that he cares about. So how do they depict that in the card? He is a 3/3 for 2 and a white, mono white, with vigilance. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Sacrifice Boromir, Warden of the Tower. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. And the ring tempts you. The fact that the ring tempting is tied to this card is a flavor, just slam dunk. Like, it's perfect. I also love the idea that he literally sacrifices himself to protect the rest of the party, because that also checks out, like, flavorfully. It's perfect. Now, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, you counter that spell. I'm not 100% sure what that's referencing, but I have no doubt there is an element in the story that is trying to invoke. You know, the idea that he will, I don't know, there's manipulating or preventing the manipulation of space and time is not necessarily something that Boromir was known for, that I'm aware of anyway. But stifling evil and stifling those who will use evil to their own, to nefarious gains. I don't know. I like that as this character. So I think this card actually is really well done. He's also a human soldier, notably, which is the perfect type for him. So honestly, an additional, like, selfless spirit kind of effect on a human soldier, that could be relevant in a lot of decks. I think this card actually could be, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I don't personally play Modern or Pioneer yet anyway, and but I know that humans is absolutely an archetype, and soldiers is also like a playable, style in some of those formats as well. Maybe this is a card that could fit into those decks. I genuinely don't know, but it reads to me like a card that is efficient enough and gives you enough that I could see some benefit there. At the very least, maybe seeing sideboard play because of that ability of being able to stifle free casting. That's pretty cool. Honestly, though, could you imagine? Okay, this set is not standard legal. It's not. But could you imagine being able to pull Boromir, Warden of the Tower, in from your sideboard to deal with Atali decks? in standard right now. I'm just saying that would be amazing, but unfortunately we can't, because it just would prevent, like, Atali's just a 7/7 trampler now. Just deal with it. That's all you're getting. Anyway, I think that's cool. Also, Fires of Invention can go pound sand. I don't know. I think this card is a cool hoser, which fits the white color identity perfectly. So anyway, good stuff. Now, lastly, we have one more card to talk about, and it's of course the one that we haven't talked about yet, and that is Aragorn the Uniter. There are a couple of different versions of Aragorn. This is the mythic from the main set. It is red, green, white, blue. So it is all colors except black. Which, okay, and with the name The Uniter, you get the idea that we're talking about Aragorn's ability to, you know, well, unite the different peoples of Middle-earth against Sauron. So, okay, like, him being kind of a conduit between elves and humans and dwarves, and, you know, to a single banner they can all rally behind. Yeah, that kind of makes sense that he would have so many colors. So he's a 5/5 human noble. No, that makes him a 5/5 human noble for 4. Granted, it's 4 specific colors, but still, that's pretty sweet. But wait, there's more. Whenever you cast a white spell, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever you cast a blue spell, scry 2. Whenever you cast a red spell, Aragorn the Uniter deals 3 damage to target opponent. And whenever you cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So I kind of love this. This, actually, come to think of it, these modes are all like vaguely reminiscent of the boon cycle in a kind of a weird way, because if you think about it, like, the boon cycle in alpha were 1 mana instants that did something in every color. Like, green was giant growth. They give a creature +3/+3. Well, power creep's a thing, so this one gives it +4/+4. Sweet. And you just get that as a tag on to any green spell you cast. I like that. And then with a red spell, it just does an additional 3 damage to your opponent. Just pop them in the mouth for another 3 just for casting red spells. I kind of love that. Like, that's just good generic value. And then whenever you cast a blue spell, you scry 2. And so anyway, sorry, the red one is reminiscent of Lightning Bolt, which deals 3 damage to any target. The blue one is the Ancestral Recall, which is part of the Power 9 and, like, way too powerful. So rather than stapling card draw onto every single blue effect, they did the fixed, like, safer, like, lower power variant and gave you Scry, which still selects your upcoming cards in a cool way. So I like that. That's neat. And Scry 2 is meaningful as well. So when you're casting blue spells, depending on how you do it, you could end up, like, scrying quite a few. You could see a lot of cards that way if you're digging for a specific combo piece. And then the white one, the white boon was actually Healing Salve, where you would gain 3 life or prevent 3 damage. That card's real bad. It's just real bad. And so I'm kind of glad that they were just like, you know what? Let's do something else with this ability. And it just instead creates a human soldier token. So this card gives you generic good stuff value on all 4 of those colors. And you can lean into whichever one you want. And that's kind of fun. Like, you could build honestly, the way that I anticipate wanting to build this card is by selecting 2 colors, focusing primarily on them and splashing for the other 2. So rocking, like, a Gruul Smash deck that has some mana fixing, like some number of planes and ramp and grow style effects, some number of islands, duels, of course, so that you can get those casting, or you get those colors down, because Aragorn wants to lead the charge. You want to get Aragorn down as fast as possible on turn 4, or maybe even turn 3 if you ramp, and get him down, get him going, because then every other spell you cast, all your creatures, all your instants, all your enchantments, all your walkers, everything, are going to be triggering Aragorn and giving you value in some way. And if you built the deck to take advantage of any one of these modes, you can do some really neat things. So Aragorn the Uniter is going to be joining, like, King Kenrith as a card that you can build in so many different ways. If you sit down to a commander table and somebody represents that as their commander, if somebody says, I'm bringing my Aragorn deck, unless you have played against that deck before, you'll have no idea what's about to happen. It could be a token-based strategy. It could be some weird combo deck. It could be, like, straight up burn. It could be so many things, and you're just not gonna know until you see it in action. Or it could be some, like, it can be an amalgam of any of those things. Like, you could easily build a commander deck. I mean, the mana base would be tricky, but doable, where you have a hefty balance of all of them and you just get generic value, go burr. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like a fun, like, mid-range commander where it's just all trying to get the multiple color stuff going. This card gives you that. So he's super flexible. And on top of that, this guy's just awesome. Aragorn is a phenomenal character that is well loved just by millions. And this representation of Aragorn, in my opinion, is freaking awesome. And it has a lot of haters, and I don't care. If you dislike this interpretation of Aragorn, you are wrong. It's cool. Yeah, he is not what you envision in your head. He's not what I envisioned either. But now that I see him and now that we have him, I'm pretty happy. I like him. I think he's cool. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate it very, very much. Or the podcast, where if you're doing the audio version. We're going to be doing more episodes of Overthinking MTG covering other Lord of the Rings spoilers, because holy cow, this set looks tight. So we might be doing some individual episodes, but I'll also be doing some other ones that are kind of themed like this, where we take, I'll probably do one about the lands. I'll do one about, special events, do one about the sort of forces of evil. And I'll figure out exactly how we break it down based on the cards, but I'm excited. This is going to be super cool. This set is just absolutely hype. I can't wait. Yes. Huzzah. Let's go. And I will catch you on the next one.